I'm Heather Morgan, and I'm here today talking with Tim Schwab, founder and CEO of Sales Speech, a really cool tool for automating your outbound emails. And today, I'm going to ask Tim a few questions about sales and entrepreneurship for sales for startups. So, Tim, hi. What was your first sales job like?
Okay, so my first sales job was about 10 years ago. It was at a company called Guard Insurance. And when they hired me, it was part of a test. They were doing an inside sales team. Before this, they didn't have any inside sales. When I joined, they had about 180, maybe 150 people. And so they were testing out this inside sales team. It was my first sales job and really my first real job. And they like to track effort metrics, and so you'd come in and they'd say, well, you have to do 50 phone calls today in order to hit your baseline, and you'd either hit 50 calls in a day or or spend 4 hours on the phone. And so the job was reaching out to travel companies and getting them to sell our travel insurance. And so, for the first month or two, I, hit the phones pretty hard and figured out what I was doing. But then I got really, I started to think about this idea of them tracking phone calls, and I thought how ridiculous that was, and that there were plenty of these salespeople on, on this 20-person team that I was on that were terrible and spent, the better part of 6 hours a day on the phone and didn't make any sales happen. And so, I started experimenting with email, partly because I didn't like cold calling. I mean, picking up the phone and talking to people you don't know, I think for most people that's kind of an awkward thing. Even for me, and I'm really good at it, and I kind of do it for a living. But even me, before I pick up the phone or before I have to do like a cold call, I get a little nervous. And so I think everybody has that, and so I really wanted to eliminate that. And so I started doing a lot of my prospecting through email. About a year after that, so about 2 years in, I became their top salesperson by leaps and bounds. At this point, I think my territory is worth over 4 million, and and the next person maybe had a territory worth, I think, about 1 million or so. But they fired me because I didn't have the talk time or the phone calls that they wanted to see.
Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me.
Nope, true story. So I remember, they brought me into a room. It was the manager, who was a very militant, middle-aged woman, and her boss, who was a guy named Mike. And they brought me into this room, and they were like, "Well, this is going to be your last day at Guard." And I remember being really confused because I was like,
"It's like a bad joke."
Yeah, it really was. And I'm like 22 or maybe even 21 at the time. And so I'm like, wait, so you guys are firing me because I'm too efficient. I don't know if I said that right, but now when I'm older, I understand that. And I remember asking, I'm like, okay, well, what do I take away from this or whatever? And they're like, well, I don't know. And so they kicked me out of there. They had someone escort me out as if I was going to cause some type of problem. And I remember being really confused. And so I went home. And the next day, after kind of thinking about this all night and like stewing over it and being really confused about the world in general, because I thought for sure I did a really good job, and they said they didn't want me around. The CEO then called me, who didn't know anything about this. So he called me the next day, and he said, "Tim, I just found out about what happened. Those people are morons. I'm so sorry about this. Actually, we're selling the company to AIG, and so we're going to build out our inside sales team. And I need you to, to help do that and to help bring some of the things that you've learned to them and blah, 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 blah." And so from there, I rejoined the company as a national accounts manager and also managed inside sales teams at the same time, and, worked for AIG for about 4 years until that got to be very painful.
Yeah,
I don't recommend it.
That's so funny. That reminds me of a job I had. I think I was 20 in Asia, where the company I was working for was very like, this is the way we're doing it, very bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And my mentality coming from California was very like, oh, let's be as efficient as we can. Let's leverage tech. Let's like,
Right. Right.
like 80/20 everything. And
Yeah.
yeah, it landed me in a very similar situation in the end, but I don't think I belong there.
Right. Yeah, it's funny how that works out. Yeah, it's weird in sales especially because sales can often be a field that people go into because they don't have another craft that they're good at or that they're passionate about. Or sometimes in just like last week, I was talking to a sales manager who was an architect first, and then realized that he wasn't ever going to make any money and it was going to take too long. So then he got into sales. So it's interesting that some of these like very these old ideas of what makes a successful salesperson are still kind of lingering, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of it has to do with just sales in general kind of being transient. People come in and out of it a lot, and the people that are really good at it typically don't share with other people. Uh, it's just how it's been in the past, right? Salespeople have a scarcity mentality, or they certainly used to. I hope it's going away now.
Well, I think those are all very valid points. I think there's a very specific culture in sales, and it's a little bit different with B2B sales
Mm,
than other sales, I think, and
totally.
also inside versus field sales.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was talking just the other day to a few people who do training for Salesforce and Box, and they were saying basically they're talking about that scarcity mentality. And so, and you're even trying to scale up and hire more salespeople get nervous about that because
Oh
the
yeah.
first thing they see in their mind is, oh, my territory is shrinking, and that's
Right.
my commission.
Hmm.
So I think it has to do also just with like the incentives of salespeople within the organizations they work.
Totally. Totally agree.
Cool. So, also moving forward, I know you've worked in a lot of different industries, both as a founder and as an employee.
Hmm.
With Sales Beach now, what experiences did you have in the past that drove you to create this product for B2B sales?
I think getting fired for using email is a pretty good one.
Well,
So,
yeah, that's
no,
definitely
I
true.
had I mean, I came into that company with a giant chip on my shoulder, but it certainly wasn't helped by them firing me. And so it became a little bit of an obsession of mine that I really wanted to eliminate all cold calling and just see if I could do it through email. And so I had some success, but AIG still that old mentality of you need to, if they're not making phone calls, how do we know that they're doing things? And even if and back then it was more difficult to find ways to track email,
Yeah.
and certainly a company like AIG was not using external tools. It was only things that their 50, 60-year-old IT product team was putting together, in some ancient language. So it was really painful. And so after that, so that was in Wisconsin. So that was
Oh
out in the
man,
Midwest. And so after that,
Madison or?
it was Stevens Point, Wisconsin. So right in the dead
Oh
center of
gosh.
nowhere. And um, so then I moved out here to work for Life 360 and did business development for about 2 years. And that was a lot like sales, but it was just only managing 4 or 5 deals. And the big difference between business development and sales, I think, is the negotiation element is much bigger when it comes to business development and doing big partnerships. But that's always been something that hasn't been the fun part for me. I'm not a big negotiator,
Oh really?
and even though I managed to close a deal with General Motors while I was at Life 360, it would have brought the OnStar button to their app, which would have been huge because they're a safety, security, family company, and so it was really perfect. I negotiated the whole thing; everything was signed. At the last minute, General Motors reorganized, and so I got a bad taste in my mouth for business development. That deal fell through. I started doing consulting for startups, and saw that this cold calling thing, it was a different problem out here that I saw. Whereas in the Midwest, you you have people that kind of grew up doing a little bit of sales and they don't really know how to build products. That's kind of the
Yeah.
Midwest as a
The
whole.
reverse here.
Exactly, exactly. So out here, you just don't have that kind of hustler. Um, it's a different hustle, right? It's a
Yeah,
product
it's a much
hustle. It's
more
a
introverted hustle, I think.
sure an introverted hustle. I like that. That should be the title of your next book. Um, so it's yeah. So it's an introverted thing, and so I started realizing that okay, a lot of these startups that are building a lot of great products, but even the more established companies are having problems finding people just to do cold calling. And
Yeah.
so in the Midwest, they were able to get people to do it, and were kind of, um, shackled by this dogma of doing things this old way. Out here, it's like they couldn't even get people to do it, and startups have this
Yeah.
revolving door when it comes to lead generation and prospecting, where they'd have people come in, and it takes 3 months to get them going. This is,
Yeah.
I don't know what you hear, but typically
No,
what I
no, no,
hear,
no. I know.
yeah.
Yeah. Every conversation with every B2B company I have, I hear exactly that or worse.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the story that I hear, and I mean, I'd love to hear you add to this, but what I hear is, it takes 3 months to bring somebody on to do lead development or prospecting
And it
or.
takes longer than that just to find them.
Right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So 3 months is kind of like the standard baseline. And the more complicated your company is in terms of its product, the longer it can take. The more
Sure.
sophisticated the product and the space is.
Yeah.
But I know a number of founders right now that just have really hard time hiring the right sales rep because it's not half of it is like hiring someone that's hungry enough and right with sales, but it's also with B2B sales and especially inside sales, if your product's really complicated and sophisticated, you really need to hire someone who understands that space. So like one company I know, they do a lot of media sales, and so they kind of want someone with that background, but there just aren't a lot of people with that background, and then the people who have that background don't want to work for a startup. So it's sort of like this really difficult thing.
I think it's really hard for founders who don't have experience in sales.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I went through 500 startups. We were part of Batch 7 last year, and there were some companies with some great products, like Silver Push came out of there. There were a few others, and they just didn't have that in their blood. And so I'd watch them bring in people to interview and talk to and try to find the right person, but they just didn't know what to look for. And so, I mean, my co-founder and I were just talking about this the other day. Andrew is, my CTO, and he's an engineer. And we were talking about just like how difficult it is, or just the differences between hiring engineering talent and hiring like business, sales, marketing talent.
Yeah.
It's, with an engineer, Andrew was saying, I can go on GitHub, I can see exactly what they do, I can give them a project. And then he was commenting on, when we hire sales and business people, that they're just, for him, he doesn't understand exactly what skills they need, right? And if you asked him, he would say, well, I think they'd need to be like talking to people, and that would be important. And so there's a lot of like,
it's kind of like black hole.
There's not a lot of like, I don't know if anyone has like a model of what this should look like. And so everyone's just kind of poking around and finding stuff that doesn't work. And then they get lucky with something that kind of does, and they stick with it. Like, I'm not going to mention the name of the companies, but there's two well-known startups that we're familiar with that have had this problem where they can't hire a VP of sales or a head of sales. They'll bring somebody in, it doesn't work out, they have to get rid of them, and it just kind of happens over and over, and eventually either they just don't hire it and the salespeople just kind of run on their own, or they figure it out. But I haven't seen a lot of companies do that.
Well, I think part of the problem is when you have these really technical founders that are also kind of not only shy but skeptical towards sales.
Yeah.
When they do eventually hire that VP of sales or first sales hire, I think there's oftentimes a notion that we just need to hire them and they'll do it all. But there needs to be a marriage between
Yeah.
them and that sales. So, I mean, they need to understand the product, they need to understand the process, everyone needs to be working together. Because I've seen that happen more than a few times where they're just like, oh, we got this great sales guy, and oh yeah, he's just gonna do it all. Thinking, what? But
Yeah.
yeah, so part
I
of
think that's every founder's dream.
Yeah,
really.
of course.
I mean, that's every founder's dream,
Or
that
delusion.
somebody's just going to show up. Oh, yeah, I mean, it never happens. But that someone's just going to show up and take away this burden, this sales burden. Like, someone's just going to be able to handle that. And so when they meet somebody that's close to what they think that might look like, who wants to work for them and is excited about it, they're like, holy shit. And it's just, you know, we're passionate people as founders, so we can get carried away with that. So, yeah, I see the same thing. You're absolutely right. Yeah, but sorry, to finish the question was, so I started doing consulting and I saw all this stuff. And I was like, well, I know how to do this. And at first I was confused because I'm like, well, this is simple. Why isn't anybody just doing the thing they need to do, which is, you know, make the phone call, ask who they need to talk to, you know, figure out what the right discovery questions are, you know, and whatever. And I was like, why isn't anybody doing this? And so then I finally figured it out, which is what I said earlier. And then I was like, oh, well, I know how to fix this. What they need is they need a tool that they can basically hire someone who has a little bit of experience, or at least, you know, but not a lot. And they can give them a tool like, you know, like Sales Speech, and kind of automate the prospecting, so that, one, they don't have to try to motivate somebody to do cold calling. And two, they can, by doing that, the salesperson's time then is spent more with, you know, the customer and on the product and actual learning, and not either, you know, stressing out about making phone calls or, you know, dealing with the mountain of rejection that is sales. I mean, that's not going away, right? But by kind of putting it in a box and kind of automating it, you know, it can kind of help you separate it in your mind and make it different. So what we found is that with Sales Speech, you can get somebody new up and running and effective in about a month if the training's there. So, you know, that's what we wanted to do, and, you know, so far it's worked really well. You know, we've got Berkshire Hathaway using us with an inside sales team. We've also got Mixpanel and Indenaro using us, and they're having a lot of success. And we're solving that exact problem where they've got, you know, good salespeople who can close deals, right? Like, those people, you can find those people if you've got Series A money and you know what to look for. But they couldn't figure out the outbound part. There's this phase that every company goes through where they want to start reaching the enterprise. And right now, inbound marketing is very popular, automated marketing automation, all that good stuff. And that'll get you to, you know, newer companies, small, medium-sized businesses. But there aren't a lot of people at the enterprise level that are reading case studies and white papers. I mean, that process is completely different. So what they're finding is, in order to get a seat at the table when large enterprises are doing RFPs, that's their, you know, cycle they go through annually or biannually or quarterly, where they just shop out their contracts and say, hey, we buy, like, for example, they'll say, we buy CRM software, we use Salesforce, but we want quotes from Microsoft Dynamics, from, you know, all their other competitors. And this is true of all, you know, products that they're purchasing, that the enterprise is purchasing externally. And but in order to get a seat at the table, you need to talk to the right person at that company who's typically a buyer or a purchaser who is not thinking strategically about what the company needs at all, and is just a process person. And so in order to get to that person, oftentimes you need to do some outbound and talk to people and do some mapping and all of that painful stuff that nobody wants to do. So anyway, so that's what got us to start Sales Speech.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely think that outbound is very underrated. There's nothing more effective than outbound at the end of the day, other than meeting people in person.
Right.
And you see that in Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross. You see that in a number of other B2B industry reports that are coming out.
Absolutely.
So I have a question, but I think we've kind of already answered it about
Sure.
the most painful part about outbound sales, and I think you would say cold calling, maybe.
Maybe. I think it's before the call, actually, because like once you're talking to somebody, it's usually not a problem. At least not for me. I know for me, the game is entirely psychological, and it's all before the call. And there's this weird thing is that sales is kind of like this, this macho thing where everyone's kind of quoting Glengarry Glen Ross and talking about always be closing and watching Boiler Room and The Wolf on Wall Street. And the truth is that without a good two things. One is that a lot of these guys, a lot of these glorified images of salespeople, selling ice to Eskimos and ketchup popsicles to women in white gloves. Those people, they're crooks, and they don't produce long-term value for any company. And so, what you were talking about earlier is how, engineers and founders who are technically oriented, they kind of, their mental model of what a salesperson is often that Glengarry Glen Ross person.
Yeah.
But what all of that is, and nobody's really said this, but what all of that is just a defensive routine against the rejection that they have to face. And in fact, it's not very productive. So getting back to the point is that actually stems from the most painful part of prospecting and sales, which is just picking up the phone. I think the most painful points are at either end, right? It's doing the prospecting before the call, and then it's asking for the sale at the end.
Yeah.
All the stuff in the middle is just process.
Every moment when you have like that chance for rejection, basically.
That's right.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's something that I think I've thought about in the back of my mind, but no one's ever really said quite that way. So it's really something to think about.
Yeah.
So, how does Sales Beach work to alleviate that pain? I mean, you can't like give someone a huge confidence boost, but you do make their day easier.
Sure. Yeah. Well, by taking that whole prospecting efforts, I mean, what Sales Beach allows them to do is take a cold, targeted list of prospects, import it, and then allow us to basically do the rest and just have responses kind of drip in on a daily basis. Now, if you're emailing a cold list, only 1 out of 4 of those responses are going to be good, and you can get that higher if you target really well. So there's still going to be a rejection, but by automating it and setting it so these emails go out daily and that the responses come in, it forms a good habit for the rep of dealing with it, daily, but also being in control of it, right? They're opening up Sales Beach, they're logging in, and for someone who's not a salesperson, it probably sounds weird that we're spending a lot of time on that part of it. But the psychological aspect is something that is difficult to sell to investors, for example. I don't get to talk about it a lot, so I think this is a good forum for that. But yeah. So we alleviate that by automating it and basically just making it so they can't not do it. There's a double negative for you.
No, that makes sense there. It's like kind of there's no excuse because
it's already happening.
You have a very automatable process. So I'm really curious, since I haven't used Sales Beach, but I do use some products like Yesware, how much are you able to do custom inserts within your templates?
Sure. So I really like Yesware. I really like Tout. I think they're both really good products. For Sales Beach, we're able to do, in our templates, we're able to do a lot of the same things that they are, but the main difference is that we're able to do big, automated drip campaigns.
Yeah.
And where neither of those tools are really aimed for that or kind of built for that. So that's the big difference. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
No, I think that makes sense. So it's kind of, in a way, a similar product, but for big drip as well. So you have a lot more automation beyond just, like, one email.
Right, and and we designed it specifically for an individual, a sales development representative, an
Mm-hmm.
outbound salesperson, whose number one job is to, reach out to cold contacts, get meetings,
Mm-hmm.
do a discovery call, and then pass it off to sales. And so we make that really easy by once they get a response in their inbox, they have to flag it as either warm, cold, or set it as a follow-up. And the follow-up feature works like boomerang. So if they say follow up in 3 days, it just disappears and comes back
Oh, that's
that
great.
date. And so when we thought about designing the product, we were like, well, there's only three things that can happen with any of these responses.
Mm-hmm.
It's either no good, there's no deal, there's no opportunity. There is an opportunity, and we're trying to schedule a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we're going back and forth. They've asked for some materials. We're kind of in that limbo
Yeah.
beforehand. So there's really only three things. So the product's designed with that in mind, and we integrate with Salesforce so that once they are ready to turn that lead into an account and attach an opportunity to that they can do that right in SalesPage.
That's great. I really need to try your product out. I know we've talked before, and I thought your product was really cool before, but I haven't actually tried it. And I think, as I mentioned before, I've built a lot of automated stuff with Drip myself, and basically implementing Google Mail merges combined with YesWare. But
Oh yeah.
it's kind of
I've seen
janky. It's
recruiters do that a
self-made.
lot.
Yeah, it's sort of a self-made thing, so it'd be kind of interesting to check out your thing.
Totally, we'd love to give you a demo.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Tim. I think this concludes our interview. This is Tim Schwab from Sales Speech, and I am Heather Morgan with Sales for Startups. This video has been brought to you by Salesfolk and Sales for Startups. Visit us at salesfolk.com and salesforstartups.org. Thank you.